But the word tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. Remember that.
Wow, so if we tariff the exports from other countries, they'll just pay us money with no downsides? Why didn't we try this before? Because that's not how tariffs work. And we have tried this before, and it might have caused the Great Depression. Just after the election, people suddenly started to search for how tariffs work and who pays for tariffs. The answer may surprise you, or it might be blindingly obvious. But can Trump install whatever tariffs he wants, and who pays for them? Chaos lawyer Liz Dye explains.
Thanks, Devin. Donald Trump has promised to slap 60% tariffs on all goods coming in from China and a 10% tariff on goods imported from all other countries. On the campaign trail, he even threatened to impose a whopping 100% tariff on auto imports from America's largest trading partner, Mexico. Before we talk about if he can legally do that or if it's a good idea, let's define our terms. The Center-Right Tax Foundation defines tariffs as taxes imposed by one country on goods imported from another country. Tariffs are effectively a tax on consumer goods paid by you and me and every other person who wants to buy stuff. So say that a Chinese manufacturer agrees to sell Nike a pair of shoes for $20. A 60% tariff means that the importer, that is Nike, pays $12 to the US government when those sneakers are offloaded from a cargo ship docked in Long Beach, California. Trump insists that the Chinese manufacturer is the one who ultimately pays for that tariff and that this will swell the US government coffers with no impact on the American consumer whatsoever. But that's just wrong. The Chinese manufacturer is never going to eat the $12 tariff, and Nike doesn't want to reduce its net profit. So the end result is that the $12 tariff gets passed on to the American consumer at the point of sale, raising the wholesale price of that pair of sneakers by $12.
Yeah, if I can interject for a second, the problem is actually worse. You think, okay, a 60% tariff, so the consumer just ends up paying $12 more. Not great, but not terrible. But no, because sellers operate by gross margin. So if Nike imports a shoe for $20, they need to make a profit. But they aren't selling directly to the consumer. They need to sell the shoe to the retailer. And transport, advertising, and overhead is expensive. And doubling the manufacturing cost before selling it at wholesale would be totally normal. So let's say they sell it to Foot Locker for $40. But Foot Locker has to pay staff and operating costs in all their stores, which is expensive. So Foot Locker roughly doubles the wholesale cost of it again and ultimately sells the shoe to a consumer for $80. But that's in a tariffless world. A 60% tariff makes it $32 at import instead of $20, and $64 at wholesale, and then $128 at retail, assuming the same margins. So a $12 increase in tariffs on the cost of goods could easily result in a $48 increase in the final sales price that consumers pay. This is a simplification. In the real world, it would depend on the pricing power, and some of the costs would be shared between the parties, but you get the idea of how a small increase in cost of goods result in a much larger downstream cost to consumers. Plus, the domestic manufacturers don't just sit back while their foreign competitors raise their price. Why would they turn down free money when the consumer doesn't have any choice but to pay more? They raise their price to match or just undercut the foreign competition. Oh, and the cherry on top is that our foreign trading partners don't just sit back and take it either. They issue retaliatory tariffs against American exports, making them less competitive abroad. So people buy fewer American goods. And none of those taxes nor the original tariffs actually go to American companies. I don't know why people think this is boring.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, raised tariffs. Did it work? Anyone?
If tariffs just make everything more expensive, why would we even want them? Well, in the early days of the Republic, we funded the government with tariffs on imports along with excise taxes on sinful products like alcohol and tobacco, which worked out more or less okay for about 100 years, especially for wealthy industrialists or the so-called robber barons who paid basically nothing to Uncle Sam. But in 1893, wheat prices crashed and an overexpansion of silver mines and railroads led to an economic bubble that burst. And even though the Great Depression hadn't happened yet, the panic of 1893 ushered in the greatest depression that the country had ever seen, with unemployment rocketing to almost 20%. Imports dried up overnight, and no one had any money for alcohol and tobacco, which meant that the government had to go find some other source of funding. And that's how we wound up with a federal income tax instead of a pure consumption tax. In 1913, Congress ratified the 16th Amendment, which states the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived. The U.S. government finally had a stable funding mechanism that wasn't directly tethered to the extreme ups and downs of the economy, and it was more fair. Because if you think about it, you only need one toothbrush and Bill Gates only needs one toothbrush. But if the tax on a toothbrush is, say, 12 cents, well, that's a lot bigger share of your paycheck than it is of Bill Gates's. But Trump believes in cutting taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals, essentially returning us to the pre-16th Amendment days. In fact, the massive tax cut he rammed through during his first term is about to expire. Spoiler alert, it did not increase government revenues as promised. And now he wants to make those tax cuts permanent. So Trump has to find another source to make up for all the cash that will not be coming into the government coffers if he keeps cutting taxes for rich people. And that's yet another reason he's so invested in telling the lie that other countries pay import tariffs. In fact, it's a lie he's stretched to fit every occasion. Here he is in September explaining to the Economic Club of New York that the solution for skyrocketing childcare costs is, say it with us now, more tariffs. And you know what? We're going to let you listen to that entire 2-minute answer without any edits.
If you win in November, can you commit to prioritizing legislation to make childcare affordable? And if so, what specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. You know, I was we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so impactful on that issue. It's a very important issue. But I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that because look, childcare is childcare. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including childcare, that it's going to take care. We're going to have, I look forward to having no deficits within a fairly short period of time, coupled with the reductions that I told you about on waste and fraud and all of the other things that are going on in our country. Because I have to stay with childcare. I want to stay with childcare, but those numbers are small relative to the kind of economic numbers that I'm talking about, including growth, but growth also headed up by what the plan is that I just told you about. We're going to be taking in trillions of dollars, and as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kind of numbers we'll be taking in.